We're not grading you.
That's great. I love it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Cathedra webinar. We are coming to you live on December 11th, 2025. If anybody is an NLC webinar first timer in the room, our Cathedra webinars get their name from the Creek word for learning. And today you're going to be learning about developing engagement plans for clean energy projects. And this is actually part 2 of the series. And this is going to cover stakeholder identification and mapping. This will be with your instructors, Michelle L. Holliday, who is president of Michelle Holliday and Associates, as well as Catherine Cole, who is founder and CEO of Kit Cole Consulting, LLC. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the training and development specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're also thrilled that you could tune in for the webinar with us today. You could please follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. And we also have our copyright infringement law printed here. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Moving forward, if you want to check out this course or any of the others we have on the learning platform, you can go over to the courses section. Because there was a part 1 of this webinar series, if you did miss that, you can find the recording as well as the slides in that courses section. And then moving forward, when you want to join us for a webinar, if this is your first time, you'll just click on that green banner like you did today. And as long as you see the green banner, the webinar is open. We do ask that you join with listen-only capabilities because we are recording the webinar. Just helps to cut down on audio feedback. And if you joined and your sound is coming out of the wrong device, maybe you're trying to use headphones or a Bluetooth speaker or something like that. If it's not coming out of the right place, you can go down to the bottom of your screen. Where I have a telephone icon, you might have a headset icon instead, some headphones. But either way, you'll click on that and it'll bring up a list of your speaker devices and you can choose the right audio output. And then even though we ask you to join on mute, we do, of course, still encourage class participation. We want to know your questions. We want to know those comments. If there's any tech support issues, I can try to help you navigate through. We will rely on the public chat for all of that. So if you don't have it open yet, you can go over to your messages panel and select public chat, and that'll open up the chat between myself, the instructors, as well as you, the webinar attendees. If you want to say anything, ask anything, just click in that box where it says send message to public chat, type what you want to say, and then you can either hit enter or you can click on the little paper airplane. I encourage you to also check out the shared notes section. There's a list of important links in there. I did already put a link to today's slides as well as the worksheet for today's webinar. Both of those links are in the chat for you, but there's other good stuff in the shared notes. And then if you think we missed something from me along the way, you could always use that hand raise feature that's down at the bottom right corner of your screen. And we would love it if you got the chat box going together now. You could let us know your name, where you're tuning in from, your work or your role in Indian country, and then your tribal affiliation, if you have one. You might be a tribal employee and not have your own affiliation. That is okay too. All are welcome. And then just a quick final note for you while you guys introduce yourselves in the chat. Try your best not to click on this circled red menu panel. It's going to pull you out of the webinar immediately and take you to whatever you clicked on. So just try to avoid clicking on that. If you do and you get pulled out, you can just rejoin by clicking that green banner once again. All right, y'all. It's with great pleasure that I introduce your webinar instructors, Michelle Holliday and Catherine Cole. And Catherine, I have made you presenter now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Brooke. And hello, everybody. Michelle and I are super glad to be with you again. This is the second in a series of 4 webinars that we're doing around engaging with folks inside and outside of tribes who might have an interest in your clean energy project. And Michelle, it looks like folks are putting in the chat where they are. Laura and John, great to have you. Good to see everybody and to be seen, especially during this busy holiday season. Thank you for taking the time to be with us for this webinar. All right, so as I said, this is webinar number 2 of 4, and we're glad that you're here. And if you missed number 1, do not fret. It is in the library, and we'll just do a quick review of what we talked about in webinar number 1 after we talk about today's learning objectives. So today, folks are going to leave this webinar with an understanding of stakeholder identification and mapping, including identifying key parties who are critical to your project and to your project coming in on time, on budget, and within scope. And then we're going to talk a little bit about principles and processes of stakeholder mapping. And y'all should have received, in addition to the link for the webinar, a worksheet from Brooke. We'll also pull that up, so don't panic if you don't have it. And we're going to be doing some actual stakeholder mapping in real life during the webinar today. Michelle, do you want to just say hi? I've just been yakking.
Yeah, going to the next slide. It kind of gives a little background. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Let's see. Maybe that's me.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Michelle, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Very good.
Brooke, can you hear Michelle?
Yeah. So while Kit's trying to get her
okay,
audio.
You can hear her, so it's my problem.
Audio to fix. I'm Michelle Holiday. I'm a member of the Iowa Tribe of Oklahoma. My Indian name is NAHASDA. NAHASDA means good heart, and Pimi means lady. And I work with Kit. We work on several types of energy projects and public participation, but we have experience in the energy industry, mine spanning for 30 years. And I work with tribes and for tribes. And it just really depends on the client. But we've done a lot of work in public participation and project and energy development and other related infrastructure projects. So we're excited to be here with you today. And I don't know if Kit can hear me now, but Kit can kind of introduce herself. And we have like our long history of ourselves, because it'd be the webinar talking about all the things we do, but we hope to impart wisdom to all of you and helping you along your energy, endeavors.
Yes, exactly. And welcome to Karen Shea. I see Karen has joined the webinar as well. Here's a great slide with an amazing picture of Michelle. And this is more about us. And Brooke, thanks for the introduction. And just a little bit more, we've worked with tribes, as Michelle said, and for tribes for a long time. And we've worked on energy projects in particular very deeply and across utilities as well as tribes. All right, so quick review of webinar 1, which we had in October. If you weren't able to join us for that webinar, we talked about what is community engagement and why it's important. So community engagement is having a commitment to talk with folks who are or may be impacted by your project, as well as connecting those folks with the proponents of your project. Maybe we could just take a second here, Michelle, and ask folks to put in the chat what kind of project they're working on.
Yeah, and I wanted to also just say that if you're not working on a project, are you in the phase of probably a grant? And if you are thinking about a grant or thinking about a project, the engagement plan is really important, and it could be a key component to your submission. So even though you may not be or working on projects that interface or on tribal land or have tribal land a connection to the tribe, that's also okay too. So it doesn't have to be specifically a clean energy project per se.
And I'm working on a battery energy storage project right now. So I'm just putting that in the chat, or also called a BESS. And I see some other folks are in the chat typing. And as Michelle said, if you don't have a specific project you're working on right now, no worries. We're just glad that you're here. So our commitment to community engagement is based on the fact that we have seen so many projects get derailed by community input and community concerns. And so one of the things that we really stress in terms of the importance of community engagement is making sure you're keeping your project on scope, schedule, and budget by engaging early and often. We've seen communities who aren't communicated with, and then they get a wind of the project and they get very emotional, they get very organized and start opposing the project when in fact maybe it's a project that would be good for their neighborhood. But because no one's communicated with them, they've made up some stories about the project, and then they become opposition rather than potential support. So John, it looks like you've got 100 plug-in solar appliances. Oh my goodness. Across Oglala Lakota households on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. Oh my goodness. That sounds like a really big project. Talk about community engagement, because I'm guessing you're going to need engagement from all of those households that you're going to be working with. Also, what we talked about in our first webinar, we talked about acting ethically and making sure that as you're doing community engagement, you're checking your ethics. I know we're all very ethical people on this webinar. It's not because we don't think you're ethical. It's just because the ethics for community engagement, and we have a link here to a resource for you, a URL that's a resource for you. Sometimes the ethics come across a little bit differently relative to community engagement. So we encourage everybody to check out the IAP2 organization. It's the International Association for Public Participation. And there are specific ethics there for people doing community outreach that may be helpful to you. And in terms of your approaches, we always encourage folks to respect tribal knowledge, experience, and authority. I'm sure all of you do that as well. And act consistently with tribal codes, culture, and norms. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get through this webinar a little bit more. And Roger, it looks like, and John, thank you for the comment about culturally relevant engagement is paramount. Yeah, I think that's a great comment for sure. If you're communicating with folks, but you're not communicating in a way that works for them, it's sort of like, what is the point of communicating, right? And then finally, engagement principles and activities back here on the slide. So making sure that you're addressing project issues and challenges up front, rather than sort of as you're halfway through the project. It's easy to get derailed. And then acknowledging that outreach to tribal communities and non-tribal communities can look very different. The rationale for reaching out is the same. The rationale for community engagement is the same. But the way that you reach out can be very, very different. And we're going to talk a lot about that in this webinar, about using different methods of communication based on who you're reaching out to. Michelle, anything I missed on this slide?
No. I just wanted to let everybody know that if you've missed the first webinar, Brooke put in the link that goes back to the library for the Native Learning Center, and she put that at the very beginning of this webinar too. So we went into detail about that, and so how that sort of comes into what we're going to be talking more about from the projects on tribal lands or working with tribes. The focus on that is what we're going to be addressing today, and those stakeholders within on the reservation, in the jurisdiction of lands. So just to be more specific in this webinar too, we'll be kind of working with you on those considerations, or if you haven't thought it, it'll be helpful to how you're navigating your project and considerations there. Thank you, Kit.
Yeah, Michelle, thank you. And I think Michelle and I have found, and Michelle, I'm speaking for you, so let me know if I'm speaking out of turn, but we have found so many of our clients don't think about community engagement necessarily, right? You're really focused on making your project a reality, or getting grant funds for your project, or getting through the tribal review and approval. And so sometimes the community engagement is a last thought rather than a first thought. We totally get that. So if that's where you are, you're just starting to think about community engagement, this webinar is the place for you. Don't feel bad. There's plenty of folks who struggle with this and who struggle with it at all phases of their project, all the way from applying for grants, getting the grant, making a project plan, getting all the financing together. Community engagement can be part of every single one of those phases, but with all the things that all of you have to do every day, it's really easy to let it go by the wayside. So this is a slide for all of y'all, just in case you're putting together your plan as you're thinking about the foundations for community engagement, as you're talking with your peers, folks inside and outside the tribe, understanding your project and the potential impacts of your project. That's number one, and we call that assessment. Number two is planning and developing your plan, right? So identifying folks who might be impacted inside and outside the tribe, and identifying their issues. And we're going to look at that matrix, that stakeholder matrix, and talk about the connection between folks, their issues, and how to communicate with them. Implementing your plan, evaluating and adjusting, and then having an element of sustainable ongoing communication if it's needed and wanted. So in a project, maybe like John's, there may be ongoing communication that needs to happen, right? Because you're putting solar appliances maybe in people's homes or outside of their homes where they're living, and maybe engaging with them during the installation is important, but ongoingly too, maybe after the installation is done, maybe the community engagement is still something that's relevant and that folks need.
I wanted to make a point. I know Roger had entered his particular project. And I think when you're looking at your foundation and if you're engaging a tribe and your community engagement strategy, part of, as you're sort of going, it's not always 1 through 5. You may be in 1 in the assessment for some time to evaluate that when you're working with the tribe. And so then as you're going out and you're seeing where this potential project is, then who are those stakeholders in that community? And this is what we're kind of talking about in terms of the mapping with the shareholders. And so if you're going out and you should be thinking in your mind, okay, I want to do this project, that maybe the tribal council's interested in the project. They haven't fully announced it, or they fully have not communicated that. And then you're going out in the community. That's why it's really important to identify those shareholders, because ultimately you're going to be having to communicate about the project description and scope. So I think some of these fundamentals of where you're at early stage, doing that early homework is really important so that you can, address and start to establish trust around the project and mitigate any kinds of potential risks that they see as harmful to potentially the community, or finding, advocates that want that project, right? That's equally important as well.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Michelle. And John shared in the chat that his project is set to span 5 years. So that definitely speaks to what you were just saying, Michelle, that this 1 through 5 isn't linear, right? You might be going back to 1 or 2 on this chart again as your project proceeds. I think it's a really good point. All right, so do you want to talk a little bit about why community engagement is important? Michelle, I already did, but we could go into that a little bit deeper for folks.
Well, we touched on it. Sure, I touched on it about the grants. And so a lot of times I think some tribes are at a phase of planning, right? Or the planning department or others are sort of wanting to submit a grant. And so really now there are some requirements to grants that ask for a community engagement plan? How are you going to articulate? What methods are you going to ensure that the community is aware of your project? And so as you lay that out, some grants are very kind of specific. Some, it could be a narrative, but I think you want to, through this webinar, it will give you sort of the content of even writing up a narrative. So I think that's also very important as you're sort of developing your communication methods. And normally what we would say is a project description, but really as you go back to the slide, we talked about the assessment. If you are letting them know you've been thoughtful about your project, how in the way that you're going to continue to work with the community, the tribal community, and different influencers, I think that really allows you to allow the grant reviewer, the agency, that you've been very thoughtful about what this project means. So we wanted to put that in terms of that, because often tribes are at that place. And, you know, there are different skill sets, right? There's certain things that we do really well. And so this is just to help supplement, you know, your scope, add it to your project plan. And we just wanted to sort of emphasize that and include that in this webinar 2 session.
Yeah, I think that's great. So, Michelle, you know, you've worked on so many of these projects that tribal land approvals and issues are different. You want to talk a little bit about the nuance and complexity that's present when you're doing outreach with tribal land approvals needed?
Well, you know, when we're thinking about clean energy projects off reservation, developers sort of know the lay of the land in that regard. And so when you go onto the reservation, tribal lands, you know, there is a different framework about land statuses and requirements. And so how that relates to your community engagement or public participation plan, you have to be aware of those timing and what you need to do and what stakeholder you need to talk to. And oftentimes you have to know that you have to understand the tribe's codes and regulations around the permitting of a project. And that's one of the first questions. And then socializing your project and talking with the planning department, or if it's the attorney. Again, every tribe is different, but the first thing you should be thinking about in terms of alignment with your community plan and your outreach is where you're going to site the project. Really, if you wanted to have the tribe approve it and it was on tribal reservation land and you have to go to the tribal council, the land status is important. And if they do have that authority to do that, then of course you're preparing that for presentation or submission. It's very different if you are working with allotments, allottees, or home site leases, where you have to work with individuals that are on the land. So it's always important where you're siting, what type of land classification it is. And I have put in this particular slide. If you're not that knowledgeable about that, it's important in terms of keeping your project on scope and the timing, because some of the processes for approval for land consent, meaning going on the land, getting the authorization from the federal agency, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or the tribal council, takes time, and you need to incorporate that. And then you need to communicate, depending on what those regulations are. There are certain timing letters that have to be written, prepared, and there has to be a response back. And sometimes in allotments, there could be multiple allottees. And sometimes some are deceased. So they're strongly recommend, if you can, move it off allottee land and put it in land in trust that the tribe has oversight on. All these siting requirements are important. And if you are the point of contact in the tribe working with the EPC or developer. The developer probably will not know that. So when you're looking at alignment of infrastructure, transmission investment, substation, coming in on distribution and transmission, transmission lines, sometimes those are considerations on siting and permitting. And those are the considerations that you have to put into your engagement strategy, right? And that is a stakeholder, federal agency, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or the region is. And so I can't tell you enough, in your doing your analysis, when we had the opening slide talking about analysis, is that's part of when you're looking at your engagement, who do you need to engage with? And of course, this is a key component to that. We're not going to go into a lot of detail of definition, but it can be very frustrating if you're not aware of that, and if you're not asking the right question. Land should be a question to ask, and then again, what are those codes and regulations? But I think that's really important. And then also making sure, as we mentioned earlier in the slides, that the environmental requirements, what is the tribe's, how do they codify environmental review? And sometimes, the land is a component of that. Also, making sure that you're checking all those requirements and then ensuring that you add that to the plan. I think at this point we can sort of move on. I think that's the key takeaway for that slide.
Yeah, I agree, Michelle. And John just has some really great comments in the chat. I'm just monitoring the chat while Michelle is presenting. And John, I don't know if you're in a place where you could take yourself off mute, but I think hearing just a little bit about your project might be helpful for everybody on the webinar. If you have a moment and you're comfortable doing that, I know I'm putting you on the spot. Okay, so, thanks.
He's trying to change.
Sure, I totally got it. Absolutely. Yep. So let's move on to the next slide while you struggle with your technology. So again, sorry to put you on the spot. And John, I love what you're putting in the chat. It's super helpful, and it's exactly applicable to what we're talking about today. So Michelle, you and I have been involved in so many projects where the proponent of the project, whether it's the tribe or someone outside of the tribe, is not telling their story effectively about that project. And I'll just share really quick, because I know Michelle has about 100 examples of this from her practice, but I'll just share really quickly. There's a battery energy storage project. I put that in the chat that I'm working on right now in Southern California. And the proponent of the project, this project is not on native land. The proponent of the project did not share with the community what the project was. And as a result, the project, the gossip and the sort of rumors about the project just spread like wildfire. And so the project went from being a battery energy storage project to being something that the neighbors thought was being built to particularly spy on them and survey their neighborhood. So it's just an example of, if you're not talking about your project, someone else will talk about it, and you probably won't like how they will. So John, I see you can use your microphone. Do you want to unmute yourself and we can talk about your project a little bit?
Sure. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you great. Thank you for being willing to talk about it.
You're welcome. So we were, our project is happening on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, 2.1 million acres of land, checkerboard. We're talking trust land, allotted land. By far and away, the largest landholder on Pine Ridge Reservation is the Oglala Sioux Tribe, OST. So when we're reaching out to engaging, we're at the very preliminary stages. One thing that came up was there will be some private, like some home ownerships, and some of these folks are going to be on BIA land. The land is held in trust. So we came across, we knew nothing about this BIA wind and solar resource lease, this whole packet and process and its code of federal regulations. And oh my goodness, it was a lot of stuff. So once we ran into it, we then realized we had to be very particular and make that expectation clear with the participants, because our program is a grant. So we're just going to kind of roll it out. And we're looking at these Lakota households. And if you are on lease land, whether it's going to be a mobile home or a site built, then we have to undergo this process. So getting the BIA involved was very critical. And I think not knowing that ahead of time, really, it was kind of a shock to us, like, oh, wow, we didn't realize it. We thought it was easier. But lo and behold, the BIA is there. And anyway, it's very important to understand. So I think we learned afterwards, not knowing ahead of time really kind of set us back a little bit. So that was our experience. But now we know. So I just thought I'd add that little nugget of knowledge for those folks out there. Understand that, go to the website and check that, whatever that link is, I don't have it, but the BIA Wind and Solar Resource Lease Packet, it's a whole thing of stuff. So
thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, John. I didn't really go into the Hearth Act, but some tribes have passed ordinances where they have control and decision making to approve agricultural leases and business leases, right? So let's talk about a battery energy storage project. I'm working on a project with the BESS, and the developer wants to proceed and move forward with a lease. But this tribe is a Hearth Act. So when you go onto the BIA website, there'll be tribal listings of these tribes, and that's to help them encourage economic development or have them have tribal energy sovereignty, to have exercised those negotiations with the developer, with the tribe, or with the tribal utility authority. Sometimes it's with the tribal council. Again, every tribe is different, and every tribe enacts their Hearth Act, and there's certain types of provisions. Ultimately, when that agreement is approved, it still has to go through a shortened review at the secretary level. But that's also very important in terms of if it's a Hearth Act tribe. And a lot of times people, again, developers or people who are not familiar with development don't know that. So I know we could probably go into a webinar to really talk about land statuses. But if you ask the right question at the very beginning, it really helps. And I think that's why we talk about engagement, is you're thinking you're going down, and like John said, it seems like that's very easy. Oh, we can go on tribal land and we can build something a lot faster than we can on non-tribal land. Well, yes and no. And as long as you sort of have that roadmap in your engagement strategy and who you need to talk to, sometimes it's at the regional level, sometimes it's at the area office. And those are sort of the nuances that where it really does delay, and it could be a week, or sometimes it can be 30 days. And as we all know, developers are wise at taking you so long, tribe, to come to determination of approvals. Well, they don't know that. So I think you keep everyone, you over communicate about that. You lay out what those expectations are. And oftentimes you need to work with your EPC, or if you are the EPC, you figure out what is acceptable for approval, and then you work the process. And that's really part of the engagement strategy. Some people don't think it in that process, but we meaning Kit and I, we come into client work and they don't know, either it be tribe, or they don't even know development process of approval process. And then, we get involved to sort of help, move along the project.
We had a client, Michelle, I remember, who didn't even know that the Bureau of Land Management was an interested party in their project. And it was Bureau of Land Management land, right? So as you and I were figuring out the matrix of folks who were interested parties, was like, well, how are we going to communicate with BLM? How are we going to keep them in the loop? But a lot of folks, who are our clients, don't think about that, right? They just sort of gloss over it, like, well, we don't need a strategy for communicating with BLM, but in fact, they really did. So if if you're sitting here on this webinar and you're thinking about folks who you've missed out on communicating with, don't worry. That's the point of the webinar. That's the point of us having this conversation, is so that you can sort of expand who you're thinking of as an interested party, so that you can communicate with them in a way that works for them.
And hopefully not delay your project, and hopefully get them to become agreeable to give a land consent. And again, if you can't get a land consent, then it becomes very difficult moving your project forward.
So some more on a community engagement plan here. Just this is for you, for your reference. So you have this. The link to the slides is in the chat. And if you need it again, I know Brooke can share it. But we just wanted to make sure that you had a list of the things to think about as you're putting a community engagement plan together. We've talked a little bit already this morning about who might be interested parties in your project. But as you're developing a plan, these are the sort of things 1 through 6 to consider. We're going to talk about putting a matrix together so you can organize what kinds of folks would be interested in the project, how you might reach out to them, and how they might like to be communicated with. So when you have a lot of different interested parties, our experiences, those interested parties all have different preferences for how they want to be communicated with. I'll just share one particular example. For me is I have a city manager in a city where I'm helping a client work on a project. That city manager never wants me to email him. He always wants me to give him a phone call. I've had other city managers who never want a phone call, and all they want is a text. So one of the reasons we're giving you this matrix, and Brooke put the link for the worksheet in the chat, is so you can just start to organize for yourself and keep track of who you're reaching out to and how it is that they prefer to be communicated with.
Yeah,
Michelle,
and I think
thank you. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I was going to say, from a tribal perspective, you're thinking about, let's just say, I'll give you a hypothetical, the tribal council approves to proceed, or there's this project, and then you need to meet the tribal requirements. And so you're looking at, of course, the dynamics within a tribal government. You have the environmental department or environmental services, right? Engineering. You have to work with that individual, and then also maybe it's the cultural resources, the tribal historic preservation office or officer. You have issues around employment, the TARO, the employment rights ordinance. So every department and every individual that runs that department, as we know, sometimes can be constrained by other projects that may be a priority. And so working with them and understanding how they want to receive information, maybe they're not on board fully or even aware that the leadership approved a project. But I think in your role, if you are the project manager, or if you are working with your champion within the tribe, you're letting them know that these are the requirements and who do we need to speak to. Oftentimes we think about engagement strategies around individuals, like we talked about land, who's living on the land or how's impacting the land. But you also need to be thinking about those departments that have influence in moving your project forward. And sometimes getting scarcity of resource allocation for some of the type of work that's required. It is a lot of work to do. So I think you need to be thinking about that as you're looking at your plan and your matrix. And also, when you're thinking about that, we've also identified these other social impacts. And the social impacts, I think, tie to the people in the community, people who are thinking about how this can be maybe disruptive, or how this could be a positive to the company, and not the company, but the company or the EPC that's working out there. Maybe there's jobs, that's part of it. But that is all part of what we call the storytelling. I know we didn't really kind of lead into that. And some of us are very good storytellers by virtue culturally of telling a story. Some of us are more subdued in our communication. Maybe some of us are better writers. But it's really important in these methods and how we tell the story. And we do encourage the one-on-one communication. But again, we know those types of engagements can be very difficult too, coming in and you don't know who you are, and you're establishing that rapport. You're telling what this project's about. That I think is really important in your plan. And I don't think Kit and I always talk about taking that time and thinking about that. And sometimes you get other supporters that are out there telling the story and telling the information accurately, which is really important. And as a project moves forward from the phase of planning into construction, bringing on other folks that are key to, the development of the project.
I don't know how many of you are on Nextdoor or Facebook, but we know that bad news and rumors travel 60% faster than truth on social media. It's one of the challenges of communicating through social media. So telling your story through social media can be great, but other people often like to tell an inaccurate story about your project on social media. And my clients will say to me, well, why did that rumor that isn't true go so fast? It just spread right through the community so fast. And it's because studies have actually shown that that is what happens with negative information or inaccurate information. So Michelle, you want to talk a little bit about how you see projects and the folks around the projects?
Yeah, when we're talking about the contents of a engagement plan, we wanted to put together an infographic about depending on the tribe, right? Depending on where the tribe is located in parts of the country. A lot of times when we are developing an energy project, key, first off, the cultural typo. Is this in an area that is sacred? Is it in a land area that has ceremony or have historical significance, right? Or migration paths? That's part of where you go to communicate and find out what areas are not even authorized. Mm-hmm. And of course, we talked about talking with tribal council, right? Sometimes in the Northwest, by the waters, are there issues about fishing? Are there issues about sustained hunting? Where is it going to attract avian issues? So we sort of wanted to kind of let you think, if you hadn't been thinking, depending on impacts, like talking to your elders, the economic development engines within the reservation, which are a lot about the casinos or the economic development, retail, the C-stores. There are different ways where this project's going to be located. Is it in an industrial zone based on the land use plan that the planning department has put together? Is it authorized to do that? Sometimes you don't even know if there are zones that are set up. But this is where you're sort of asking those questions. And farming, is it going to be disruptive to agricultural interests with the tribe? Fire and police, all of these factors. And then as John in his project, a lot of development of community solar, these housings that are, being created, housing and renewable development. There's a lot of focus there. But I think we wanted to sort of give you this visual to really be thinking each community or influencer, what is that impact? Or how they can be helpful. Maybe you're in the school and you're talking from a STEM perspective about the project and encouraging the youth to come and learn about the project. There are elements to that, and we wanted to really sort of make sure that you're thinking, again, depending what type of tribe, where's the geographic location, and those other considerations that you may look out and it doesn't look like anything is happening out on the reservation, but clearly there are activities that you have to go and do your research on. And these are what we call the specific stakeholders, and then the matrix of identification of those stakeholders, and to begin to be thoughtful about how you are going about creating that for your engagement plan. I don't know,
Yeah,
if there was
that's great.
size there.
Yep. Well, I love this graphic. I hope everybody loves it as much as we do, because we feel like it's really helpful to just see graphically kind of with whatever the project is. Doesn't have to be clean energy project, could be housing, could be mobility, traffic, but whatever that project is, maybe a health clinic, it's helpful to put your project right there in the middle and then start to think about all of those folks who might be impacted and where they are relative to your project geographically, but also their level of involvement. John has a good comment. And John, I don't know if you want to go off mute and talk about this a little bit. I think it would be helpful for everybody to talk about your comment. The pre-TIPO era projects continue to have sometimes unfavorable views that have persevered across generations. And I'm sure, Michelle, you have, yeah, Michelle's nodding her head. We've definitely run into that. But John, do you want to talk just a little bit about how that's impacting your project?
Sure. Thank you for that. My experience comes from, I was at a clean energy conference at the Snoqualmie Nation Resort in Washington, and I drove there, from Pine Ridge. And anyhow, I was doing a little bit of research, as we all do before we go somewhere. I want to know more about the tribe, what their customs are, traditions, kind of their belief system, trying to educate myself a little bit, trying to be a good relative, a good representative of the Lakota people. So I go there and I understand that the Snoqualmie Falls is held and revered very sacred by these people. So I bypassed right by the venue where the conference was going, and I went straight to Snoqualmie Falls, and I took it upon myself to do the walking trail and go down there and kind of look at them and try to understand from a first person perspective, like how these people felt, what this meant to them, just the majestic nature of it. So, and then I go to the conference, and then one of the lunch sponsors was PSE, Puget Sound Electric. And they were, at one point, I remember one of their folks got up there and kind of gave an overview, thanked everyone for being there. Then we're having lunch, and it comes up, and he's like, asked me a question because I was on the panel. He's like, what do you think we can do? I mean, how do we get over this, this cultural generational thing of like PSE coming in? And I'm like, well, think about it like this. I mean, you guys put a hydroelectric power right inside their sacred falls. Imagine, what that felt like. And I couldn't think of the metaphor, but I'm like, let's say you're a very devout Catholic and your family's been going to the same cathedral for years. Imagine someone putting like a car wash right in the middle and saying, hey, this is good for the community. So
yeah,
and it was just, anyway, this was before TIPO, before any of that stuff, and it's still there. So the people were still, the Snoqualmie people there, they just still did not like this huge thing right inside their sacred falls. That's what I meant by the comment, but thank you for allowing me to share where that came up from for me.
John, I think it's such a good example, isn't it, where folks from outside the tribe can come in, have done something historically on tribal lands, right? Before there were TIPOs, before there was maybe a process. And now the tribe has lived with that project. And And it's not a project they were consulted on, and it's not a project that they support necessarily. It might not even be a project that benefits them, right? It may be a project that's benefiting people who are downstream. So I think it's a great example. Please, John, go ahead.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that, because they were, of course, the lunch sponsor. They got mentioned. Like, if it makes you feel better to sponsor lunches, I'm sure the people appreciate it. Thank you, guys. But it's never going to undo. And I know your predecessors, whenever this was made, and you guys put your stamp on it. So you're not directly involved with that today. Neither is this current tribal council involved in any proceeding or discussion. But you have to still kind of encounter that. For some of these elders, maybe their grandpa or somebody was there. They remembered whenever a PSC came in and bulldozed over, or just, kind of set the tribe aside. So we're doing this. And today they benefit, of course, but they were sponsoring lunches until the cows came home. But that's not going to ever make it right. I just kind of had to lay it out for this guy, like, do what you want, of course. Come here and talk to the people, but you're kind of the representation of what this means to them and how that was really a big insult back then. And today they're still uncomfortable about it. But so anyway.
And it's interesting, sometimes companies, and Michelle and I have both worked for these companies as clients, John, and I'm sure you've engaged with them as well, who are genuinely confused about why buying lunch for everybody does not solve the problem. I mean, genuinely, there probably were some folks there from PSE who were like, we've been buying y'all lunch for like 20 years at this conference. Like, what is your problem? Yep. And that's not going to help. Right. And so I think your comment is really well taken. Like, y'all can buy lunch forever from here until eternity, but it's not going to undo what's been done to this very, very important place, right, for this tribe. Michelle, I could tell you wanted to weigh in. I'm sorry.
If you're in a situation or in a position, because there are legacy issues that we're talking about, right? And that is part of the engagement. Is like, you're going to be going, well, my project is, and you're comparing yourself to historical context of a utility that had not got the consent in your project, or the work you're doing with the developer, or your product that's, a clean energy project. These are the things that in your assessment of understanding and your commitment to the tribe to do it right now, those are some of the residue or the legacy issues that you still have to overcome in getting your project on that land. If it was that particular, if that was a project that, or tribe you're working on for a project, that is issues that Kit and I have worked on. And then there's a reputation risk component to the developer you're working with, or if you are the developer, to say, well, we're not going to do it that way. And then it's like, how are you going to demonstrate that to the tribal community? Mm-hmm. And this is where the engagement strategy of the one-on-one and having the conversation is. A lot of times, well, that's not my project, but this is how we're doing it. This is what the council has approved. So sometimes work that has been done on reservations that are energy related, and where tribes want to exercise their tribal energy sovereignty, like, for instance, the housing project, or looking at a battery energy storage as a backup to their casino development. That makes sense because the tribe is sort of moving forward, but it doesn't negate these legacy issues that we're talking about, and your effort and your sincerity of ensuring that this project is a benefit to the tribe. So when you're laying out, and we're getting very close to doing our exercise, we're looking at those stakeholders. A part of that's part of this impact, and part of like an influencer, positive or negative, that could really be harmful in moving forward the project. And we're not minimizing their concern. That is a legitimate concern that John raised. It's the process and the methodology of how you go about that in a respectful way. This is part of the engagement strategy on tribal lands. And if you have not worked a lot on with tribes on tribal land, these are very sensitive points that we're trying to raise, but there is a process that you can do that in a thoughtful way that you can do that. And unfortunately, that is the history that you're facing dealing with tribes. And again, a council member could be very excited about clean energy, driving a clean energy championing initiative. But sometimes in the community, tribal community, that may not be consistent with the tribal membership on that reservation or in an area. And so is it something that we can't accomplish moving progress? Yes, but I think now going into this matrix, I'm really excited to do this exercise with you, because I think we would like to see some of your thoughts about some of these stakeholders and ideas of who are those stakeholders. So I'll allow Kit to continue in terms of our next phase of our exercise.
Sure. So let's take a look here at, y'all have this worksheet. And if you don't, it's okay.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think Kit,
no.
Brooke put it in the chat. So
Yep.
if you want to click on it now, let's take a moment, and if you want to bring it up on your side on where you're at, let's take a moment to sort of do that and let people, if you don't have it, let you sort of get yourself ready to sort of think about based on our information we've provided you today.
So we've found this matrix, which is pretty simple. Michelle and I have been at meetings where we've just hand drawn this matrix. You don't have to have it perfectly organized. But we found this super helpful in trying to keep track of who's involved, what their issue might be, right? So maybe their issue is with the falls, with the historic use of tribal resources to create energy, and then how these folks like to be communicated with. So we use this on every project, and we're really happy to share it with you. And we have found it to be so helpful in terms of not just tracking who cares about a project, but specifically what their issue is, because folks inside the tribe, folks outside the tribe may have different issues with your project.
And I think that from a planning perspective, if you are writing a grant, or if you're helping a tribe write a grant, then this is something that you can include in your addendum or your appendix, and that they've taken the time to at least identify, right, that they're considering. And again, on this shareholder, the name or the group, it can be a tribal department, right? Mm-hmm. Getting those approvals, the land, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, all those are all stakeholders. So as we shared on the infographic, we didn't put all the agencies. We really looked at it as a community aspect to it. So I don't know if everyone has that in front of them now, but we would certainly like to engage with you about who are those stakeholders for your projects, or do you want to share with us, and we can kind of go through that now.
So I see Roger is typing, but John, just to go back to your project, I'm just thinking about the complexity of your project. So you have residents, right, who are getting these solar appliances. They certainly would be there on the left-hand side in that upper left-hand corner, but you probably also have maybe the TIPO for the tribe. Who are some other folks, John, when you think about your project, you think about putting in that left-hand column under the who?
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to share our project. We're trying to have equitable distribution. We're bringing a project as a 501c3, so we're going to benefit X amount of, again, there are about 35,000 people in Pine Ridge, so 4,100 households approximately. We can provide 100 of these. There's always going to be so-and-so got picked, I didn't get picked. How was the determination made? So we're trying to have like the best way, and we're doing this by reaching out to our looking back at the traditional way of governance, and we're looking out to each district. There's 9 districts, 9 communities on the reservation, and we're going to go to the district leadership, and we're going to reach out to you first. We're going to ask to set aside some time for us so we can be present in the community in person, and people can come and ask us questions, meet us who we are, and we can articulate our project to them. That was the key to us, is having that intermediary. We know how our tribal customs work. We're going to go to each district and then allow people in the community to, and then we're also going to share on the tribal radio station. Here's what this project is.
Oh, great.
Yep. And then that way, those of you who are not able to make it, tune in, listen in, you can answer. And then also for a lot of them have grandkids, we have a Facebook presence as well. We have Instagram, Snapchat. We're trying to do all the appropriate ways to communicate. So for us, it's not only those people who are out in the communities who have their own home and they're maybe pretty far out, but using what's in place, what's the expected way to communicate with that community by going to their tribal or their district leadership is what it's called. And then finding a common area, because each of our districts has a community action program office, CAP office, and we'll go there and sit in person designated times and answer questions as people come in. But yeah, it's pretty complex because it's over, 5-year period, and we have to explain what the program is, how one is eligible, and why somebody may not get selected. I mean, there's always going to be that, so it gets difficult. Well, yeah, thank you for allowing me to share.
John, I think it's so interesting because it didn't occur to me that there would be people who would be selected people who might want to be selected who weren't selected.
This is true.
Right. And so then the process, and there might be people who were selected who are like, oh, I don't know about that. Right. So the process that you're using, I think is really interesting. But I also want to just hit on one other thing you're talking about, which I think is so important, which is the method of communication. You mentioned the radio station, such a good example of using a method of communication that reaches a lot of people in a very short period of time. Please go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's what we found to be the most effective. And kind of just commenting on what you guys mentioned earlier, a lot of people doom scroll and they hear something on Facebook. It's like playing telephone on steroids. All they hear is like, what the negative thing that came out. And you can have all these great positive impacts in the community. It's like the sensationalism of news, like only the bad stuff really resonates with people. So it's hard to say, look how many kilowatt hours or just how much our offset is going to be in carbon reduction over X, snooze. Don't want to hear it, like all I want to know is like, did somebody get hurt while the project was happening? The thing fell down, it's crazy.
Right. So, it's wild, isn't it? That there's so much good news. There's so much good happening with I know all of you have projects that are benefiting folks, not just John, but sharing those benefits. People also get very suspicious. Like maybe you're sharing benefits with me, but those benefits aren't real, right? Like you're making it up. So it's when you bring good news, especially on social media, it can get extra hard to get traction on that good news.
Yep. Very good.
Michelle?
I wanted to just make a comment about projects that are off the reservation versus on the reservation. So the tribal councils approve the project and there's a grant, and then, you're moving forward to implementation. Oftentimes, Kit and I have clients where we have to have a robust engagement plan, implementation plan, and consistency pretty much through a project. And so when you're getting an approval from a federal agency, for instance, the Bureau of Land Management, like a renewable development project, a large project, solar project or wind project, you have to demonstrate to the broader public that you have done the communications that were necessary to ensure that there was a level of threshold of effort for that. And a lot of times Kit and I are hired to do that work, to work with the federal agency representatives in the office, also work with, if it is a tribe, sometimes tribes are impacted by that, or perhaps there's a Section 106 review with the National Historic Preservation Act, making sure that you're working with the TIPO. But when it's inside the tribe and you're compliant with all that is done, that you've checked the box, you really mitigate any kind of efforts of delay. And that's really important, because when you're having a budget, and Kit had began this, and Kit says, the scope and approving and the budget, those are really important. And so when you're looking at a grant and you only have so much resources and you're wanting to make sure that the deployment occurs and there isn't a delay, some of these factors that we're talking about can have significant delays. And so getting ahead of that in your matrix on who and identifying what is that issue, and then how are you going to address that to alleviate delay, right? Because ultimately this is tied back to your project, the clean energy project that you're working on. And it could be, we talked about wind and solar, but this is also can be geothermal. It can be a variation of a project, like we talked about a battery energy storage project. And oftentimes, we have found when you're working with a developer that's a non-native developer, let's say, they don't understand the necessity to that. And then oftentimes you're sort of saying, this is going to be necessary, or you're going to have some delay. And they'll say, oh, well, what type of delay? And if they don't have a real understanding, that's our effort, right? That you might be in that role to be able to articulate that, and like ensure that the EPC understands what that is, and then it might be your responsibility to address it. And sometimes that's where it gets, I would say, prickly around how you go about doing that and the focus of that. And it is sometimes, one would say, an art to that. But I think the active listening skills, really hearing what someone is saying. And oftentimes we'll get into the next webinar, which Kit is very, very good at sort of the evaluation of how much do you need to move the project through, and not allowing one of the stakeholders to really embolden themselves in really trying to delay this project. And that individual could be a politically motivated, as John has talked about, in terms of raising it. Is it like driven by something that happened with the tribal council, or all of that? You have to be really astute and be really actively listening to these things. And then you're taking account of what that is. Now, it may not be your position to address it, but you're identifying it. Maybe you do need to go to council to elevate it, because these are the sort of issues that come up, and what do I do? But at least you're identifying them. At least you're trying to figure out, do I need to educate them about your plan and the method of which you do that? And again, we can't have a crystal ball and say, well, these are things that might come up, but we at least trying to help you think through that in a very strategic way that really will help advance your project. So I know in the next slide, I hope some of you are writing down, or at least taking a mental note for yourself as we're sort of talking about that. And if anyone wants to sort of share an example about a stakeholder that they're thinking that they may have to address specifically, we would love to hear that as well. Other examples would be really helpful. We'd love to hear hear your thoughts.
And
Or
Roger asked
yeah.
a great question in the chat, Michelle, and I don't know if Roger can unmute himself or if he just wants to continue to share in the chat. But Roger, you have quite a project, and I'm curious about, when you look at this matrix, what you think of in terms of folks that might need to be communicated with and what kind of issues they might have. Please go ahead.
I appreciate the opportunity, and it's a pleasure to be here, and good to see familiar faces again.
Good to see you, Roger. I'm so glad that you joined
Michelle.
us.
Yeah, we're in the early stages, very early stages. Have met with 3 times now a tribe in Virginia that has recently, within the past 5 years or so, actually received a fairly large parcel of property. And it's mountainous, or it's got forest and mountains, but it's also got pastures on it. And when they got the land, the pastures were being used for a hay operation. So they were having to fertilize it and everything, and then they were coming in once a year and harvesting the hay, and then the monies were split with the tribe. And if you know anything about hay operations, it's extremely volatile. It all depends on when you harvest it, how much nutritional value is in it. A matter of just a few days or a week can make a difference between it being worth something and worth nothing. So they had difficult time in budgeting what they were going to get income from that. Plus, they have a number of streams, ponds, and other things like that on the land, and they were very concerned about the bleed over from the fertilizers bleeding into those estuaries and waterways and whatnot. And it was an out of the blue contact to them. I was familiar somewhat with what they used to have, did not know that they'd received this or gotten this large piece of property. And so when I contacted, their environmental office reached back and said, hey, we would love to talk to you about switchgrass. And so went up and met with their environmental person. I started off with the chief, and the chief transferred me over to the environmental person. Went up and met with them. We had some good dialogue. They were interested enough to the point where I got the gentleman who does all of our planting to come back in, and I'm sorry, I forgot I had my camera muted, to come back in, and he actually went up, I went up, we met with the environmental director and the chief, and then the environmental director took us out to the land and we looked at it and whatnot there. And so right now we are waiting for them to let us know what they want to do. One of the good things about this is the gentleman who plants the grass already has the grant money. He just needs the land. So it's not going to cost the tribe anything to have him come in and plant the switchgrass, maintain it, harvest it, and give them a stable check that they can count on every year for 10 years. And in talking to the environmental director, they're trying to figure out how they want to use the land and what do they want to do. And they have a number of things that they want. And one of the things I shared is that if you go ahead and establish your switchgrass now, you don't have to use it for a boiler and cogeneration. But what it does is it takes that immediate need to manage that off of your plate. You don't have to worry about it for the next 5 to 10 years. It's done. You're going to get the check. You know how much your check is, and it's done. So now you can concentrate on how do you want to set up that infrastructure for the property that best serves the tribal nation. And so I really appreciated today's seminar, because now when I reach back out to him, I'm actually going to take this form and send it to him and say, okay, I appreciate, here's where we are. Here's some of my notes. I need you all to fill this out and let me know so that I can make going forward a lot easier for you, for us. because when I understand what you expect and you understand what I expect, then we're able to move forward and create that lasting bond that we're looking for in the people that we work with, and the tribal nations that we work with. And so I really appreciate this. Unfortunately, I didn't catch the first one, so I look forward to going back and watching that and catching up with the next ones.
No, I think that's so important, Roger, when we're going through issues or working with a tribe, and sometimes the tribe knows those issues. You're coming in and you're trying to establish trust, right? Very key, as we've talked about, in engagement, and then the sincerity of how you address it. And oftentimes it is taking the time to have a meeting about what is the strategy and the method in which you best think it's best to communicate. Is it that you're going to set up a call, or is it an online, is it a Zoom, or is it Teams? Do you need to go out and have a one-on-one? Do you need to put together a FAQ or a project description, which you have that, but in the method of how they want to present it, you ask, what is that approach, right? Because oftentimes you could be viewed as an outsider. But again, if you're going in with the tribe and it's a joint effort and this is what they're wanting to do, it makes it a lot easier to move it forward in your project. And I know, Roger, you've been very thoughtful coming to the Native Learning Center and their conferences, learning about how you want to work with tribes with switchgrass. So it's really good to see you. And we're very thrilled to know that you find that this application and this worksheet can be useful. And we hope that everyone that's joined us, we always have to remember these things. From my perspective, from a tribal perspective, there's a difference about when someone comes on the reservation and they're trying to do something and gain advantage economically, or working, but it's like we're talking about the tribe advancing their projects, right? Advancing their clean initiatives, either it be at a very smaller level, meaning could be housing. We do know that there's been a lot of change in what we had hoped in terms of solar initiatives and funding reductions, but there's still ways that you can still advance what the tribe wants to do. And in this particular webinar, that is really the focus of thinking it from a small perspective, that all of these other stakeholders and all the individuals that you have to work to advance a project is very complex and complicated. And you have to take it incrementally. You have to start it, and then it kind of grows. And then there's more of this matrix. And then you're going back and being repetitive, is there other stakeholders by virtue of this initial list? Because you'll find out that it kind of expands itself, and then you're just managing that. You're managing those relationships as the project goes through its process, and then trying hopefully to just keep moving it forward and working with all of these individuals is very complex. And oftentimes, Kit, we talk about that, but you don't really know it. Like I think John said early in our webinar, we didn't know that this land issue exists. That's very common in non-tribal development, I would call energy development, and then also in tribal development. So I really have enjoyed the sharing and how you're applying that and thinking about that. Kit, did you have any comments there that you wanted to add?
Well, I really liked what Kimberly was sharing in the chat. So Kimberly, I'm just going to call out your comments a little bit, and how you're looking at ranchers, how you could communicate with them, what that message could be. That's a great example I have found in working with ranchers. I wish that sort of they got together like Rotary, but often in many cases they don't, because they're such individuals. They don't have like a group meeting. So I have to go one-on-one, right, to each one, or to small groups. But Kimberly's showing a really good example in the chat of not just thinking about who, but thinking about what she might say to them, right? She's thinking about this slide here, which is issue identification. What specifically do folks care about who are ranchers about Kimberly's project? So really good example in the chat. So Kimberly, I'm really grateful to you for sharing it. And even if it's, you wrote, it's in theory, it's not concrete yet. I totally get that. What you're doing is planning. And that's great. It doesn't have to be concrete yet. It doesn't have to be something you're doing in reality yet, but you're planning for engagement. And that planning for engagement is just as important as the actual doing of it. So remember, there's 3 columns here, and I know we're getting out of time. But there's 3 columns here on the matrix. So who, what their issue might be and how you might want to communicate with them. And as you're thinking through it, or as Roger is going to do, apparently assign homework to people he's working with to fill out this matrix, which I love. That's like, that might be my favorite comment ever about this matrix, is delegating it to other people. I wish I could on so many clients, y'all. I wish I could delegate that matrix to the client. But in terms of issue identification, thinking specifically about what folks care about relative to your projects. And I've worked on lots of trash projects, right? So noise, odor, traffic, trucks going through people's neighborhoods can be a big issue. Health and safety, community, religious, cultural, and tribal history concerns. And that came up in our conversation with John about Snoqualmie Falls. And also history of mistrust has also come up. And I think Michelle and I see that in 99.9% of the projects that we work with. And it doesn't mean you can't overcome it. It doesn't mean you can't get a project done. It just means being aware of it and addressing it, as opposed to maybe some of our friends at Puget Sound Energy were just trying to sweep it under the rug by sponsoring lunches and giving everyone sandwiches. Michelle, anything else? I know we're getting to the point where we need to wrap it up. Anything else that you want to share about your experience on issue identification, stakeholder mapping that we haven't talked about?
No, I think we've laid out, again, on these exercises, there are kinds of conferences or seminars where they go very deep, and this is not the exercise that we're trying to achieve. What we're trying to achieve for you is that you have a process and a thoughtful way that you're moving forward, even in the planning phase into this. So we hope that you've, as we're wrapping up here in 7 minutes of our webinar, that you're continuing to gain your knowledge as we go into the next seminar. And I really wanted to thank the chat conversations, and then allowing John and Roger, your sharing in our dialogue. I think hearing that and then sharing the experiences, it helps all of us in terms of takeaways, and sort of we're going down these paths of very significant projects, and what are we doing? Or in your planning part of it is imparting that to tribes that are at the early phases of being thoughtful about this plan or project, because sometimes it sounds really great, we want to do this, or we've got some money, and then it can become disappointing when there's a lot of resistance, and we didn't even anticipate land issues. And it's like we're just growing our knowledge together. And I think the Native Learning Center allows us to sort of share in that way. So we all have knowledge to share and wisdom, and we all have great stories. And so I too wish I could take a matrix and ask my client to fill it out. But sometimes, what that is and how we do it, that's what Kit and I like to do and enjoy working with people, to get to their outcomes.
And that matrix changes. So I'm just thinking about Kimberly's really amazing contribution in the chat. I would just say, plan on your matrix changing. You're going to add people to it as you get into your project, maybe take people off. And their issues might change as well as they learn more about your project. So when we do this matrix for our clients, it's not a static document. It's a living document that we go back to again and again. Are we capturing accurately what folks are concerned about? Are we talking to them and with them in ways that work for them? That's much more important than engaging with them in a way that works for us, right? Because if the message is communicated, but it's in a method that it doesn't work for folks, that message won't be received. So Roger, you have to come to our next webinar. It's in February, and we want an update on how things are going for you. And all of you, please come back to our webinar. I think, Brooke, our next one is in February. And we're going to talk about connections and conflicts between cultural traditional values and project environmental impacts. And I bet you all, just right off the top of your head, have a bunch of great examples of where this has been an issue, a conflict, or maybe a connection, right? Where the traditional cultural values and the project were aligned, which is even better when that happens.
Sounds good. I look forward to seeing those who can at the energy conference, Seminole Energy Conference.
And we will be there, and we look forward to seeing you too. So
Good.
If you've got your matrix and you can remember, bring it with you.
Absolutely.
Because we're gonna do a project. We're gonna do a hands-on group project with yes, Kimberly, I'm crossing all my fingers and toes that you get to go to with everybody in the room. So that's going to be really fun to do it in real life, IRL, as the young kids say, as opposed to just here on the Zoom. And also in between now and January, if you have any questions, if you're working on your matrix and you need help, Michelle and I are always happy to help you. Here's our email, our direct dial phone numbers, whatever we can do to assist you out in the field, we'd love to, because this is the stuff that we love to do. Michelle, any last thoughts?
No, thank you for wrapping up, Kit. And it was just I really enjoyed this session of engagement. This is what we're here to do and be helpful. And I really, again, wish everyone a wonderful, happy holidays. And if you're going to the conference, we look forward to seeing you next month. And mark your calendar for the webinar 3 on February 3rd. So thank you again, everyone, for staying with us during this time. And hopefully this was very productive use of that. And we just look forward to the next time we can meet again.
Thank you, Roger. Thanks for your chat. Thanks for Brooke for having us. And there's a survey you're really encouraged to fill out. We'd love to get your feedback. We have incorporated feedback from our first webinar into this webinar, and all of your feedback helps us have a better presentation.
Yes,
thank you, ladies. It was fun.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much for the incredible presentation, ladies. What a great selling point for the conference. We're going to have you ladies. We're going to have John. We're going to have Roger. So anybody on here, make sure you try to come in January. It's May the 26th through the 28th. And I have dropped the link to the webinar feedback survey into the chat for you. If y'all don't mind it takes about 3 minutes to complete. It is completely anonymous. You don't have to worry about your name or your email being attached. It just helps us at the Native Learning Center know what is working, what we can improve upon. And then we do, of course, share that feedback with our instructors. So it helps all of us involved, all of us stakeholders. We hope you can join us for the next webinar. That is going to be on conducting effective performance reviews with Dr. William R. Latchford. And that will be this upcoming Tuesday. And you can check out this as well as our other recorded webinars. We have an entire playlist on our YouTube channel called the Catheta Webinar Archive. They go back about the last 2 years. YouTube is a free resource, so I encourage you to check out everything we have on there. Please also check out our upcoming training events. We post about them to our social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And if anybody likes to listen to podcasts, we have our own, the Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast, and you can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcasts. But that is all we have for you today, folks. So ladies, thank you again. What an incredible presentation and what a wonderful engaged audience. But I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording. Thank you, everybody, again.